Fletcher Knox had tracked men across 3 territories, but he had never seen anyone move like the figure ahead of him. It was a predator's grace, a fluid motion through the canyon that made the very air seem to part in reverence. The bronze mask caught the afternoon light, a fleeting, blinding signal that taunted him with its anonymity. In that moment, watching the ghost he was hired to destroy, Fletcher felt a shift deep in his chest, not the cold grip of fear, but the unsettling recognition of an equal. He didn't know it yet, but the world he understood was about to shatter. The assignment had found him in a cramped office that stank of tobacco and old leather. The town council, their faces etched with greed and frustration, spoke of a masked rider, a phantom haunting the supply routes to the new settlements. Wagons were hit with military precision, food, medicine, tools, vanishing into thin air. No drivers were hurt, a detail they mentioned with a strange mix of relief and annoyance. They wanted this ghost tracked, cornered, and brought in. The words dead or alive were uttered with a casual finality that leaned heavily toward the former. Fletcher took the job, not from any sense of duty to the settlers or their expanding ambitions, but because the money was good, because the stillness of the town made his skin crawl, and because the wild, untamed land was the only place where the noise in his head quieted down. Movement was his therapy, and the wilderness his sanctuary. The trail led him northwest, into landscapes that still held the ancient whispers of the Apache. He rode through territories that treaties, worthless as the paper they were scribbled on, had promised to others. He saw the signs of a people being squeezed, their world shrinking with every new fence and settlement. But he pushed the thought away. That wasn't his problem. His problem was the story written on the earth. A faint hoof print here, a broken branch there, the subtle disturbance of pebbles that spoke of a passage. This rider was good, expertly covering their tracks, employing methods that spoke of formal training, of a mind that understood pursuit. But everyone, no matter how skilled, eventually made a mistake. Everyone left a trace. On the second day, he found the campsite nestled within a rocky outcrop, a perfect defensive position. The ashes of a small fire were cold to the touch, but not ancient. The space was minimal, efficient. There was no evidence of a companion, no second set of tracks. This was a solitary endeavor. One person, operating alone against a system of armed convoys and organized logistics. The sheer audacity of it was either the pinnacle of bravery or the depths of desperation, and Fletcher found himself unable to decide which. By the third day, the distance between hunter and prey had shrunk to nothing. He saw them. The figure moved like water over stone, fluid and certain, clad in traditional Apache clothing adapted for combat. Lightweight, practical, and designed for silent, swift movement. But it was the mask that held his gaze, a piece of crafted bronze or copper shape to cover the entire face, with narrow, impersonal slits for eyes. It wasn't for ceremony. It was a tool of war, a shell of armor and anonymity. From his concealed vantage point, Fletcher watched the impending attack. A supply wagon had stopped to water its horses, the guards complacent and loud. One moment the trail was empty, the next the masked figure was among them. The takedown was a brutal ballet of efficiency. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Blades flashed in the sun, not to kill, but to disarm and disable. In less than 2 minutes, 3 guards were on the ground, groaning but alive, their weapons kicked aside. The rider moved with a focused purpose, taking only what could be carried: sacks of dried meat, flour, and a small crate of medical supplies. Then, as swiftly as they had appeared, they vanished back into the jagged embrace of the rocks, leaving behind only stunned silence and the beginning of a legend. Fletcher made his decision then. He would not wait for another attack. He would force the confrontation on his own terms, in a place of his choosing. The knife against his throat was cold, a final, brutal period at the end of a sentence he thought he was writing. One push, a single ounce of pressure, and Fletcher Knox's story would have ended there, in the dust of a nameless canyon. But the pressure didn't come. Instead, he was staring into the face that had just stolen his breath, the face of the woman whose mask now lay discarded beside them. Her dark eyes blazed with a fury that could ignite stone, but beneath it swam something else, something unnameable that held the killing edge at bay. He had chosen the battleground with a tracker's cold logic, a narrow pass, barely wide enough for a horse, where escape routes were limited and advantage went to the one who controlled the high ground. He had arrived first, dismounted, and waited as the sun began its slow descent, painting the canyon walls in hues of orange and gold. The sound of hoofbeats reached him, steady and unhurried, a rhythm of pure confidence. Then the rider appeared at the far end of the pass, a silhouette against the dying light. For a long, suspended moment, neither moved, the air crackling with a strange, personal energy that felt entirely different from any hunt he had ever known. The masked figure dismounted with a deliberate, controlled grace that spoke of a lifetime of discipline. They stood 30 yards apart, the canyon walls rising like ancient sentinels on either side. Fletcher spoke first, his voice echoing unnaturally in the stone confines, an accusation that sounded hollow even to his own ears. The warrior's head tilted slightly, a predator studying its curious prey. When the response came, the voice was muffled by the bronze mask, but clear enough, its tone higher than a man's, yet stripped of any delicate femininity. It was strong, certain, and it shifted something fundamental in his perception. What happened next was a storm of violence. The warrior closed the distance with a speed that defied belief, a blade flashing like captured lightning in the fading light. Fletcher barely parried the first strike, the impact jolting up his arm, a stark announcement that this was no amateur. This was a killer, honed and lethal. They circled in the narrow space, their boots scraping on stone, their breath rasping in the quiet. Fletcher had size and reach, but the warrior was a whirlwind of speed and precision. Every attack he launched was deflected or dodged. Every opening he saw vanished before he could exploit it. Minutes stretched into an eternity of burning muscles and stinging sweat. He saw his chance when the warrior overextended on a thrust. He grabbed the wrist, twisting hard, using his weight to drive them both to the ground in a tangle of limbs. He ended up on top, pinning the knife arm, his body pressed against theirs. He could feel the heat of their body, hear the harsh, ragged breathing. For a moment, they were so close he could see his own strained reflection in the polished bronze of the mask. Then the warrior went still, not in surrender, but in calculation. With his free hand, Fletcher reached up and pulled the mask away. The world stopped. The face that looked up at him was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with high cheekbones and a strong jawline, her black hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. But it was the eyes that held him captive, pools of dark fire filled with fury and a profound, wounded pride. A woman. The phantom, the ghost, the master warrior was a woman. The shock was a physical blow, paralyzing him, loosening his grip without any conscious command from his brain. She felt it instantly. In one fluid, powerful motion, she twisted her hips, threw him off balance, and reversed their positions. Now she was on top, her knee pressing into his chest. Her knife returned to its place at his throat. Her face was inches from his, those eyes boring into his soul. He could feel her breath on his skin, smell the scent of sage, smoke, and leather that clung to her. Time dissolved. The canyon, the light, the dust, all of it faded into a blur. There was only her face, the weight of her body, and the cold steel promising an end. Then, a new sound shattered the fragile eternity, the pounding of multiple hoofbeats, shouts, the jangle of equipment. The guards from the supply convoy had tracked him, tracking her. They were seconds away from flooding the canyon. Her eyes snapped toward the sound, and Fletcher saw the calculation in them morph into something else, something desperate. A decision was made in a heartbeat. Instead of cutting his throat, her hand released the knife and fisted in his collar, hauling him to his feet with surprising strength. She shoved him toward a narrow crack in the canyon wall he had never noticed. He stumbled, his mind reeling from the whiplash of events. She had tried to kill him, and now she was saving him. With the shouts of the guards growing louder, he had a choice to make in the space of 3 heartbeats. He ran. The crack was a suffocating squeeze of stone, barely wide enough for one. She moved through it with an eel-like grace born of practice, and Fletcher followed, his broad shoulders scraping painfully against the unyielding rock. They emerged into a small cave, a pocket of darkness barely tall enough to stand in. She pulled him to the very back, into the deepest shadow, and they pressed themselves against the cold, damp stone, so close he could feel the frantic rise and fall of her breathing. Neither dared to speak. The guards' voices grew louder, individual words now clear and threatening. A shadow fell across the cave entrance as a man peered inside, his silhouette blocking the light. Fletcher held his breath, his muscles coiled. He felt her hand move slowly, silently, to the hilt of her blade. The guard stood there for an agonizing eternity before another voice called him away, reporting false trails heading north. The shadow retreated, the footsteps faded, and silence, thick and heavy, returned to the cave. They remained frozen, listening, until the only sounds were their own slowly calming breath and the distant, lonely cry of a hawk. In the profound quiet of that shared hiding place, a fragile, inexplicable trust was born, woven from violence and salvation. The silence in the cave was a living thing, thick with unspoken questions and the ghost of a knife that had so recently been at his throat. Fletcher watched her, this woman named Ayanna, as she finally moved from the cave's entrance, her body uncoiling from its combat-ready tension. In the dim light filtering into their sanctuary, he could see her face clearly for the first time, younger than he had thought in the heat of their fight, but with eyes that held the weight of generations. She studied him with the same intensity, a silent interrogation that demanded truth. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, a bare whisper that carried the force of a gale. She spoke of her people, of land where her father and his father before him had been born, of promises carved into treaties that were broken the moment something more valuable was discovered. She wasn't a bandit. She was a resupply officer in a war of survival, taking back food and medicine that had been stolen through the theft of an entire world. Fletcher, a man who had built his life on the simple, transient currencies of money in motion, found he had no defense. He had seen the squeezed territories, the shrinking spaces, and had always dismissed it as someone else's problem. Now, the problem had a face, a name, and a cause that resonated with a truth he could no longer ignore. He looked at his hands, the hands that had taken the council's money, and understood the finality of his choice in the canyon. By running with her, he had burned his bridges to ash. There was no returning to the town, no collecting his payment, no resuming the life of a drifter. In their eyes, he was a traitor, no different from her. The realization was not accompanied by panic, but by a strange, settling calm. The endless running had finally led him to a line, and he had chosen a side. They moved with the falling darkness, two ghosts fleeing through a landscape that wanted them captured or dead. Ayanna led the way with an innate knowledge of the land, reading the paths and dangers in the language of the earth itself. Fletcher followed, his tracker's mind admiring her skill even as he used his own to cover their trail. They pushed northeast toward the high country where she said her people were gathering, a journey of days through territory now crawling with men hunting them both. The night grew cold, the air thinning as they climbed. They found a narrow shelf of rock protected by an overhang, a precarious haven on the side of the mountain. Exhaustion forced them to stop, their bodies aching from the relentless flight. Settling on the cold stone, the vast, star-dusted blackness enveloped them. The sheer exposure and the biting cold made the space between them seem trivial. He felt her shiver beside him, a slight tremor that betrayed her tough exterior. Without a word, driven by an instinct deeper than reason, he moved closer and put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side for warmth. She stiffened for a single, defensive moment, a lifetime of self-reliance, fighting against the simple human need for heat. Then, gradually, she relaxed into the shared warmth, her head coming to rest just below his chin. The silence that followed was different from the one in the cave, softer, filled not with threat, but with a tentative, growing connection. In the profound quiet, under the watchful eyes of 1,000 stars, she asked him about his life. And for the first time, he told the truth without the filter of easy lies. He spoke of a small town with even smaller opportunities, of a father lost to drink, a mother gone too soon, brothers become strangers. He spoke of leaving at 16 and never looking back, of drifting because staying meant being known, and being known meant the inevitable disappointment. He was good at leaving, he confessed, because he had never found anything worth staying for. He felt her listening, not just to his words, but to the spaces between them, to the loneliness that had been his constant companion. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the running was over. He had been chasing something his whole life without knowing what it was, and now, on a cold mountain ledge with a woman who should have been his enemy, he had finally found it. The sight that greeted them in the high country clearing should have been a relief, a sanctuary after days of relentless flight. Instead, it felt like stepping into another kind of trap. This was not a temporary camp, but a community. Dozens of structures built from wood and hide, the smoke of cooking fires curling into the crisp air, the sounds of children playing by a stream. It was a world, whole and vibrant, and it was what Ayanna had been fighting to protect. But as they entered, the vibrant life froze around them. Faces weathered by sun and struggle turned toward them, and in their eyes, Fletcher saw not gratitude, but a deep, ingrained suspicion. The warmth of the shared ledge was replaced by the cold reality of their situation. They were not returning heroes. They were a problem that had arrived on the community's doorstep. Armed men materialized from between the structures, surrounding them with a quiet, professional efficiency that spoke of a people perpetually on guard. Their leader, an older Apache named Takakota with eyes that missed nothing, directed them toward the largest structure at the clearing's heart with a gesture that brooked no argument. Inside, the air was thick with a scent of smoked leather and solemn judgment. 5 elders, 3 men and 2 women, sat in a semicircle, their bearing radiating the weary authority of those who held the fate of their people in their hands. The eldest woman spoke first, her voice like grinding stone, addressing Ayanna not with welcome, but with accusation. She listed the consequences of Ayanna's actions, the increased patrols, the intensified searches, the attention she had drawn to their refuge. Then all eyes turned to Fletcher, and the weight of their collective gaze was a physical pressure. He was the stranger, the outsider, the one from the world that had stolen their land and broken its promises. The unspoken question hung in the smoky air. Was he a spy, a Trojan horse delivered by their own warrior? Fletcher stood silently, absorbing their fear and their anger. He saw the tension in Ayanna's shoulders as she defended him, staking her own, standing on the man who had been hired to capture her. He saw the doubt in the elders' faces, the calculation of risk versus reward. Then came the news that made all their arguments moot. The marshal had 30 men, and they were closing in, a net tightening around the mountains. The community had to evacuate to their winter grounds, but moving the elderly, the sick, and the children would take time they did not have. The eldest woman laid out the grim equation, her eyes fixed on Fletcher. They needed a distraction, someone to lead the hunters on a wild chase, to pull the teeth of the closing trap. He did not hesitate. The words were out of his mouth before he had fully formed the thought, a volunteer offering himself as the bait. He would be the rabbit, drawing the hounds away from the den. Ayanna's reaction was immediate and fierce, a blaze of protective fury in her dark eyes. It was suicide, a one-way mission into unforgiving territory with a small army on his heels. But as they stood alone outside the council structure, surrounded by the whispering trees, the terrible logic of it was inescapable. There was no other way. When she demanded to know why he would do this for people he didn't know, he reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw, mirroring her touch from the stream. The answer was simple, and it was the truest thing he had ever said. Because he knew her, and she fought for them. That was enough. The space between them vanished. Her lips met his in a kiss that was not gentle, but fierce and desperate, a torrent of everything they had not had time to say. The fear, the hope, the burgeoning love discovered on a cold mountainside, all poured into that single, searing connection. It was a confession and a promise, a goodbye and a vow. When they finally broke apart, their foreheads resting together, her breath warm on his face, she made him swear it. Not to try, but to come back. He made the promise, a reckless oath given to the stars, knowing the odds were a chasm he might not be able to cross. For a long moment, they simply held each other, two hearts beating against a looming separation. Then he felt the change in her, the warrior's armor sliding back into place. Her expression hardened, the softness retreating behind a mask of resolve. They had a plan to execute, and she would make sure he had a fighting chance. The kiss lingered on his lips, a ghost and a guide, as they turned to face the coming storm. The world narrowed to the rhythm of hoofbeats and the shared, singular purpose between them. Fletcher and Ayanna rode as one entity, a two-headed lure dragging a swarm of angry hornets away from the hive. Ayanna's bronze mask, now deliberately tied to Fletcher's saddle, flashed in the sun like a taunting beacon. They made no effort to hide their trail. Instead, they painted a masterpiece of obvious passage, broken branches, disturbed earth, tracks leading ever southward, away from the vulnerable community fleeing north. They rode along ridgelines where they were starkly visible, through open clearings where their movement was a blatant advertisement. Behind them, the shouts of the marshal's men were a constant, grim soundtrack, a reminder of the precarious thread on which their lives dangled. By afternoon, Fletcher counted at least 15 riders, a significant force committed entirely to their capture. The plan was working, but with every mile, the walls of their cage grew closer. As the sun bled into the horizon, Ayanna led them into a narrow, secluded canyon, its entrance hidden by a tumble of ancient boulders. Inside was a small cave, a pocket of stillness in the maelstrom of their flight. They led the weary horses inside and stood at the entrance, watching their back trail for any immediate sign of pursuit. The relative silence was deafening, thick with the unspoken reality of the coming dawn. Fletcher turned to her, the council's decree hanging between them. This was their last night together. Tomorrow, she would leave, circle back to safety, and he would continue this dance with death alone. Her response was not with words, but with a look that silenced all argument. She closed the distance between them, her hands rising to cradle his face, her touch both gentle and possessive. Her kiss was different this time, not the desperate clash of their first, but a slow, deliberate exploration, a claiming and a surrender all at once. It was a conversation without language, a testament to the bond forged in violence and solidified in trust. He pulled her closer, losing himself in the taste of her, the scent of sage and horse and woman that was uniquely hers. His hands traced the strong line of her back, feeling the warrior's strength and the woman's softness beneath her clothing. The cave, once a cold shelter, became a sanctuary, its darkness a velvet cloak that hid them from the world. In that half-light, with the sounds of their pursuers a distant echo, they came together. It was a fierce, tender collision of two solitary souls who had found their missing half in the most impossible of circumstances. It was a conversation of touch and breath, a silent vow etched into skin and memory, a balm for the fear of what the sunrise would bring. When they finally lay together on the cave floor, her head resting on his chest, his arm holding her tight against the coming separation, the outside world ceased to exist. There was only the shared warmth of their bodies and the unspoken promise that this could not be the end. Dawn arrived, cold and merciless. Fletcher woke to find her already moving, the warrior once more, her face a mask of quiet efficiency as she checked her horse's hooves and adjusted the saddle, refusing to meet his eyes. The loss of her warmth was an immediate ache. He stood, his body protesting, and called her name. She stilled, her back to him. He asked her to look at him, and when she finally turned, her eyes were dry but haunted by a depth of emotion that stole his breath. He crossed her, taking her hands in his, and told her this wasn't a goodbye, only a see you soon. He pressed the carved stone she had given him into her palm, a tangible piece of his promise. She mounted her horse, and for a heart-wrenching moment, she sat there, looking down at him, her expression a devastating mixture of love and sorrow. Then, without a backward glance, she turned north and rode away, disappearing over the ridge, taking a part of him with her. Alone, Fletcher turned to face the southern horizon. He mounted his own horse and began the second, more dangerous act of the play. He rode deliberately, his movements now a solitary performance for an audience of hunters. He heard them within hours, their cries sharper, hungrier, now that their quarry was alone. For days, he led them on a grueling chase through increasingly brutal terrain. He became a ghost, a whisper on the wind, always staying just ahead, using every trick of evasion he'd learned in a lifetime of tracking. But luck was a fickle ally. On the fifth day, his horse screamed, its legs snapping in a hidden hole. Fletcher was thrown, pain exploding in his shoulder as he hit the ground. The animal was lame, useless. He grabbed his knife and a small bundle of supplies and ran, the shouts of his pursuers growing terrifyingly close. He scrambled up a steep, rocky slope, his hands bleeding, his breath ragged in his chest. He reached the summit, a barren pinnacle of rock, and stopped. There was nowhere left to run. Below him stretched a valley, and on its far side, barely visible, he saw it, the faint, beautiful smoke of the Apache temporary camp. They had made it. They were safe. A profound, weary relief washed over him. He had kept his word. A bullet struck the rock near his head, spraying sharp fragments into his face. He turned. The marshal's men were fanned out below, at least 20 of them, rifles raised. The marshal himself stepped forward, his face a mask of grim triumph. He called Fletcher a clever fool, acknowledging the ruse, but declaring it ultimately meaningless. Fletcher felt for the stone in his pocket, thought of Ayanna's eyes, her kiss, and knew it had all been worth it. As the marshal raised his rifle for the final shot, a new sound cut through the thin mountain air, the thunder of many hoofbeats, coming from the north. From over the ridge poured Apache warriors, a tide of painted faces and flying hair, at least 30 strong. And at their head, her face set in a fury of determination, rode Ayanna. The marshal's men scattered in disarray, caught in a perfect ambush. In the beautiful, chaotic confusion, Fletcher didn't hesitate. He slid down the rocky face, stones tearing at his hands and clothes, until strong arms caught him. Ayanna hauled him onto her horse behind her, her body a solid, living promise against his back. They rode hard, the warriors covering their retreat, the threat dissolving behind them. She had come back. She had kept her promise, too. The wind on the ridge carried the ghosts of gunpowder and the echoes of war cries, but now it only brought the clean scent of pine and the distant murmur of the community below. Fletcher stood where he had once been cornered, where the cold steel of a rifle barrel had felt like the end of his story. But the man who now looked out over the valley was a different man in a different world. He wore the soft, practical clothing of the Apache, the garments molded to his body by months of use, not costume, but a second skin. The faces in the camp below were no longer suspicious strangers. They were the faces of his family, their names a familiar litany on his tongue, their struggles and triumphs now inextricably woven into the fabric of his own life. 6 months had not erased the memory of that desperate stand, but they had transformed its meaning from a moment of certain death into a testament of rebirth. His salvation on that cliff had been swift and decisive. The sudden, violent appearance of Ayanna and the Apache warriors had shattered the marshal's formation, turning hunters into the hunted. The professional soldiers, unprepared for such a ferocious and coordinated counterattack from an enemy they believed was fleeing, had broken ranks and scattered into the treacherous terrain. Fletcher, hauled onto Ayanna's horse, had felt not just the physical rescue, but the seismic shift in his destiny. They had ridden back to the temporary camp not as fugitives, but as victors, the shared danger forging a bond of blood and respect between him and the warriors who had once eyed him with open hostility. That evening, the Council of Elders had gathered again. The air in the structure was different, the suspicion replaced by a weary, measured gravity. The eldest woman had looked at him, her eyes seeing not the outsider, but the man who had offered his life as a shield for their people. She had spoken of his proven loyalty, the blood he had spilled for them, the risk he had embraced as his own. The invitation to stay was not given lightly, but as a formal acceptance into the fabric of the tribe. He was welcome as one of them. He had looked at Ayanna then, seeing the fierce hope and unwavering certainty in her eyes, and his answer had been the easiest he had ever given. He was not staying for a season or until the trouble passed. He was staying for good. The path ahead, the eldest woman had warned, would not be easy. The settlers' hunger for land was insatiable. The marshal's pride was wounded, and the fight for their very existence was far from over. But as Fletcher had reached for Ayanna's hand, feeling her fingers intertwine with his, he knew that the nature of his fight had changed forever. He was no longer a drifter fighting for coin or the empty freedom of the open trail. He was a defender, a protector, a man with a stake in the world. Now, standing on the ridge with Ayanna beside him, her shoulder a warm, steady pressure against his arm, he understood the full measure of the transformation. He had spent a lifetime running from connection, equating stillness with entrapment. He had believed strength was a solitary pursuit, a fortress built around a lonely heart. He had been wrong. The courage he witnessed daily in this community was not the absence of fear, but the will to stand firm in spite of it. The strength he found in himself now was not the grit of a lone survivor, but the powerful, unshakable loyalty that came from loving something more than his own life. He had found a cause, a people, a home. But most of all, he had found her. Ayanna turned to face him fully, the setting sun setting her dark eyes ablaze with a light that was for him alone. The words, when they came, were simple, clear, and carried the weight of a sacred vow. She told him she loved him. It was the first time the words had been spoken aloud between them, though they had lived and breathed them in every shared glance, every touch, every silent understanding since the cave. He pulled her close, the carved stone she had given him a permanent, smooth weight in his pocket, a token of a promise kept. He whispered the words back, his voice thick with an emotion so profound it felt like coming home. They stood together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the land they had sworn to protect in hues of fire and gold. The fight would continue, the marshal would return, and the future was uncertain. But whatever came next, they would face it together, and that simple, unbreakable truth made all the difference in the world.